Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Good Hiring Processes When You Are Hiring Online. Today's webinar is a production of the Virginia Small Business Development Center. With 27 centers across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses. The Virginia SBDC is headquartered at George Mason University and is a program that is a cooperative agreement between the U.S. Small Business Administration, premier institutions across Virginia, and our local governments. My name is Stephanie Keener, and I am the Executive Director of the Virginia SBDC, which serves the city of Lynchburg, Amherst, Appomattox, Bedford, and Campbell counties. We are hosted at the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance. Today's webinar is the third in our series with Facilitator Jennifer Woofter on managing a remote business. You can see other webinars coming up at virginiasbdc.org and click on COVID-19 resources or at sbdclynchburgregion.org. On Thursday, we'll be hosting a webinar on managing your supply chain. We're working to add more titles in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. And yes, we will be making the slides and a recording of today's webinar available just as soon as we can. Today's facilitator, Jennifer Woofter, is the president and founder of Strategic Sustainability Consulting. She manages a remote workforce across the globe, and she also serves as an SBDC advisor for the Virginia SBDC Lynchburg Region. She's going to share with us the skills for managing a remote workforce, which she's learned over 15 years doing that. If you have any questions during the presentation, just type those questions in the chat window. Tracy at our George Mason headquarters will help us facilitate those questions at the end of the session, and Jennifer will do her best to answer them. So Jennifer, it's all you.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I am going to share my screen. So it may take a second for things to get up there. Hopefully you're seeing it now or just in the next couple of seconds. I am so pleased to be here. I'm Jennifer Woofter, the founder and president of Strategic Sustainability Consulting. And as part of my work in consulting, I manage a global workforce. And that means for the last 15 years, I have been hiring interns, consultants, administrative positions, all online. We don't do really any in-person interviews except in very limited situations. So if you've seen the previous sessions that I've done, you know I always start with saying, I've made every mistake there is, I've learned all of my lessons, and I'm going to pass some of those lessons on to you. And this is a little bit of a tricky one because while a lot of technology and a lot of information has been developed around working from home or managing a remote team, there's less information out there and fewer studies that have been done around how to hire for a good fit when you are hiring virtually. So I'm hoping this will give you some tips and ideas. And as we go through, if you have questions, please do enter them into the chat function, and we'll save some time at the end to go over them. Okay, so when we talk about hiring virtually, we're really talking about from the beginning to the end, all of the different stages of the hiring process. Everything from advertising the position, screening the applicants as the candidates start submitting their information, interviewing them, selecting them, negotiating with your final choices, and then onboarding them as a new employee. I should also say that while this topic we're talking about hiring, you can also apply this to volunteers that you may be doing, interns, board members, anybody who you want to be part of your organization, maybe even if they aren't a quote unquote traditional employee, this process should work. The first element is advertising the position. So of course, I mean, I'm assuming that your organization has hired someone in the past. You want all the usual stuff still applies in this. You want the job description. You need to clarify the location. Is it exempt? Is it non-exempt? Is it hourly, salaried? What kind of benefits are available? But when you're hiring virtually, there's a few additional things that you want to make sure that you are providing in the job advertisement itself. And that includes the timeline for hiring. This is probably a best practice just all over the time, but in particular, when you are going to have a virtual hiring process, that process may differ than an in-person process. Clarify the timeline. Let people know what the next step is in the actual job description or job advertisement itself. The second part is let people know the steps that you expect to take. So will there be virtual interviews? Think about it from a job hunter step. They're going to be wondering, do I need to come in person? If, as we are under a stay-at-home mandate now in the state of Virginia, they may be thinking, how will I do an interview if I have to be doing it from home? Or is it considered an essential job function to actually come in and do an in-person interview? So clarifying that in the advertisement itself can go a long way to not only getting everybody on the same page, but also easing your workload so that you're not fielding lots and lots of individual inquiries from interested people who are probably going to be sending you the same type of information about the steps in the process. The third element is that you want to make sure that you are including any caveats or limitations to your hiring process. This is especially important right now in today's world where we have this global pandemic and there's so much uncertainty, and it feels like we have a different situation almost, sometimes on a daily basis. Is if you are planning to hire 6 months from now or 12 months from now, you may need to be doing some interviewing now or starting that process now, but with it in mind that things may change very rapidly, and making it clear what those caveats and limitations are for you and for your hiring organization in the job application or the description or the advertisement up front is going to, number one, be helpful for clarifying internally within your organization about how this job hiring process might change, but also for applicants. So, for example, if you are hiring if you're a nonprofit and you rely on grants to fund some of your positions, you may be hiring for a position for something coming later in the summer or in the fall that is dependent on a grant process that has been delayed or has the potential to be delayed. You would want to include that information, number one, because you don't want to be a jerk. Letting people know as much as possible about what they can expect or how things might change would be helpful. Clarify this is a job, this is a grant funded program. As such, while we are, anticipating hiring in the summer, things may change depending on the grant cycles or how the grant cycles are affected by COVID-19. Another limitation might be that you might say, we need somebody immediately to do customer service. We anticipate this to be a work from home position in the interim while we are under a stay-at-home work order, but we do anticipate that this would be an in-office position once things get back to normal. Clarifying if there's anything different or weird or flexible or potentially limiting about the job as a result of current situations. Of course, right now, the thing we're all thinking about is the coronavirus, but this could be applicable in a wide variety of things. For example, if your job is reliant on the federal government and there is a potential shutdown looming, or you rely on grants and the grant money is drying up, or if there's lots of construction, or if you're planning to move locations. And so, we're hiring for this location, but ultimately we expect everyone to be in this location a year from now. All of that is really helpful information, again, internally, so that everybody's on the same page about where this job happens and how it happens, both now and in the future, but also to be a good employer. The other thing I like to say is that, especially when you're doing virtual hiring, conveying your corporate culture as much as possible early on in the process is really helpful. Think about what type of organization you have. Is it formal? Is it informal? Is it flexible? Is it very buttoned up? Is it do you guys really value like being friends? Or does everyone kind of do their work and then goes home and your social life happens elsewhere? Have that, or give that feel about what it's like to work with you as much as possible. Step away from those boring, every single job application looks exactly the same, or job advertisement looks every the same. Start to include some information that can be in the job description itself that you are posting, or it can be on your hiring page of your website. Let me give you a quick example. So this is, I just grabbed this one from my company, a consulting company. We were looking for a part-time administrative personal assistant to just kind of help with a lot of the administrative things around the office. One thing is, we right up front clarify, we do not want follow-up phone calls and emails. We're a really small team. We really value our time. We do not have the in-house capacity to be fielding inquiries. We've tried to put as much information online as possible about the type of job, who's qualified, how to get us the information, what that process is going to look like up front. What that means is, if people send me a follow-up phone call or email, because it comes to me, they're off the list. Right? Like, if you can't follow the first thing I say in the process, you're not a good fit for our organization. So think about sort of what are those go, no-go things that you really want to clarify up front. We have the basics: job title, job type, time commitment, location, salary. Do include the salary, or at least a salary range. This is not just for hiring virtually. This is just a best practice. It is, in my opinion, irresponsible for organizations to be advertising jobs without clarifying what the salary range is. People waste their time. You end up getting people that are not a good fit, people that you really like who just can't live on what you're offering, or vice versa. That having a salary range there, I think, is a best practice, and not just a best practice. I think it is the minimum expectation. Minimum qualifications. So do they need a college degree? Do they need to be bilingual? Do they need to have a driver's license? Are they going to need to drive places? And then duties. So you can outline specific job description duties. We say every day is different, so we do it a little bit differently. I'm going to show you on the next slide. But what you see on our job hiring page is this whole column down the right that is tips for getting hired. And this is where you get that corporate culture. This immediately, people are either going to look at this and love it, or look at it and hate it. And right away, candidate is going to know, am I someone who could thrive here? For us, it is like, I want cover letters that look personalized, right? Like, I'm really looking for someone who puts time into it. Resumes I care less about. I feel like, yeah, as long as you have a college degree, as long as you're a good writer, your resume itself doesn't count as much for me. It's the cover letter. It's does it look like you put in time and effort? And there's also sort of a little how to apply at the bottom. This is where people are going to now really, at the very beginning stages, get a sense of, does this seem like a good fit for me? You can see sort of the actual duties. We say, here's some of the things that an administrative assistant would have done in the last couple of weeks. I like this more than the approach where it says you're responsible for typing 60 words a minute, and you need to manage the incoming mail, and you need to, we've all seen those job descriptions where you really don't get a sense of like what the daily rhythm and flow of the information is. So having sort of in the last couple of weeks or in the last month, here's what this job would have entailed, can be really helpful. That's there on the right side of the screen. On the left side of the screen, again, here is where we're trying to make that cultural fit really obvious. Not just an organizational fit, but a job fit. Like, we're interested, so for example, you can see this first one says, we're looking for someone who is interested in sustainability. That's what we do, sustainability consulting, but who is content to spend the majority of time working on administrative, project management, and social media tasks. This is not a position for someone who wants to move into a full-time sustainability consulting role. And we put that as the number one first thing, because what we found early on is that we were getting applicants who were willing to take a part-time administrative role in hopes of moving into a different role in the company. And for us, that's just, they're different skill sets. What makes you good at one does not necessarily make you good at the other. And we were finding that we weren't getting a good fit. So if you start to see patterns like that of people applying for the job, but they really want something else, or they are applying for something that they really hope will, yeah, maybe they're just taking a job sort of because they need something right now and they're not really a good fit. You as the hiring organization or the lead hiring agent in your organization, you really need to be figuring out like how do I identify the non-resume things that will make them a good fit. So for us, for this job, we need you to be tech savvy. We say you're going to be on the computer almost all of the time. We do not have time to walk you through basic tutorials of like how to use a Zoom meeting. That should be something you either know or something you are very comfortable figuring out yourself. So for us, that's really important. Might not be important for you, but really clarifying those things. The other component is that, for us, it's really, really good writing skills. I would say 80% of our daily work is in written format. That's emails, it's PowerPoints, it's presentations. Our sort of administrative assistant does like proofreading and things like that, is responsible for sending emails to clients. That's really important to us that they have good writing skills. A lot of the other stuff that sort of comes with a college degree maybe is not as important to us. So really pull out the things that you care most about and that are going to make someone the most successful at this job. Okay, so let's move on to the next step, which is screening applicants. Okay, you've put it out there in the world and now people are starting to apply. The first step is consider your usual process. Because if you already have a process and it's working for you, you may be able to just sort of take your existing process and virtualize it. Key things to be thinking about: is your data accessible remotely? So can you, if you already have sort of a place that you're posting jobs, that information is coming in, can you actually access? Can you get a list of everyone who's applied? Can you access all of their resumes, or is that stored somewhere in a SharePoint system that you don't have access to at home because you haven't yet set up your VPN? Are there technical barriers to accessing the information? Is the data organized effectively? So if you have an email that everyone is supposed to apply to, so we say, if you're interested in working with me, getting hired by us, please send an email to hire me at Sustainability Consulting and attach the following things. That may work, that process may work if you're only expecting a few applicants, because managing 2 or 3 emails, or maybe even 10 emails of applicants is not that burdensome for a small team, especially if I'm working remotely and don't necessarily have easy access to the infrastructure of an office. But if you are applying or setting up a job application where you think you may get 10 or more applicants, simply having it come via email is kind of a disaster unless you have a dedicated person just dealing with that influx of information. You may want to do something where you're moving it away just from an email inbox process. And the third element is, how is the hiring team going to work together? So very likely you will not be the only person deciding, screening, interviewing, negotiating the salary package and onboarding them. Think about all the different people who are involved in the decision-making process to hire someone, and think about how will you work together as part of this. You may, as part of your normal hiring process, get together, like everybody gets together and you go through all the applicants, or you may do group interviews. How will this process work in a virtual model? If you think, yeah, this is no problem, I get my data, it's really easy to access, the hiring team we all work together virtually in other capacities, we can just sort of virtualize this, I say go for it. If it works for you, don't recreate the wheel. But if you don't have a great system in place, think about creating one, and think about creating one that doesn't just serve the purposes now while we're all working from home, but something that you can build upon that will last and be effective 2 years from now. So some things to consider is that a Google Forms are free to use. They're easy to set up. You don't need a lot of technical expertise. And you can have people fill those out for your initial intake. So, if you're interested in doing this, please click here. And that just takes you to a Google form that asks for name, contact information, You can have people put in like the date of their degrees. You can do open-ended, you can do multiple choice, essay area. Essentially, you could have people sort of like cut and paste their resume. And I believe there's also an attachment thing. One of the things I really like about Google Forms is that on the back end, once people are entering it, sort of like a survey, it organizes that data into a spreadsheet so that you can easily use the spreadsheet and you can modify it so that you can take notes as you go. So you can sort of flag people, create a separate column and say like, you know, no, this is not a good fit. No, this is not a good fit. Maybe worth looking at, and yes, definitely let's move them forward into the next process. So using a Google form is a great way, especially if you're expecting a lot of applicants, to get away from just having it all come into an email that you have to separately manage. If you are storing applications or resumes or writing samples, again, don't just have them in an email attachment somewhere. Actually put them in a folder and organize them in a place where everyone can access them. So that might be Google Drive, it could be Dropbox, which is the tool that we use. It could be SharePoint if you're a larger organization that has the infrastructure for SharePoint. If you're using Google Forms, or if you're not, it's easy to convert it over into a Google spreadsheet to screen the candidates, where you may say that initial like no, no, yes, maybe no, no, yes, to say who do we want to interview. But the other advantage is that Google Spreadsheets, if you are doing multiple interviews, you can sort of track your notes in real time. And if you have multiple people on the interview at the same time, so let's say me and another person are going to be interviewing a candidate, we can both, each at our own home, have that document open in front of each other and be typing notes as the interview progresses. I've done this before with in another organization, in a nonprofit, where we were looking to hire a general manager. And there were 6 of us, and 4 were in person and 2 were remote of the hiring team. We had the person on a video call, and we all had the document up in real time, and we were able to ask each other questions and sort of say like, that answer didn't really work for me, or hey Joe, can you follow up on this on a more technical question, or wow, love the way that this person responded to XYZ, that you're sort of having that communication in real time while the interview is happening. Other tools that you might look at, Calendly, I love, rather than going back and forth trying to schedule emails. Like, okay, you know, can you be available at 11 o'clock on Tuesday? What about 11:30? Oh, that doesn't work for me. Could we do 1 p.m.? Using a tool like Calendly, where you set up available slots. So maybe like I can do half-hour interviews from 11 to 1 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You set that up in the tool, and then it's just a link that you send out to everyone that you want to interview. They click on that link, and then they choose an available slot. And once candidate A fills out that slot, it no longer becomes available for candidate B. So you're essentially empowering them to self-select times that you have predetermined in your schedule work for you. Calendly, like Google Spreadsheets and Google Forms, is free and Calendly is free for 1 user. If you want to use it more widely in your organization, there is a premium option. But if it's just you and you're kind of managing this process as you go, using Calendly can be a real-time saver. If you have other tools like personality tests or skills assessments as part of your hiring process, think about how to virtualize them. Are there concerns about people cheating? Are there concerns about how much time are you going to give people if you're going to allow them to do it virtually, versus if they came in person and you said, okay, you have 1 hour to complete this. Does your virtual tool allow for time constraints that you want to create? So if you guys have more questions about this, we can certainly answer them at the end. I don't want to take up too much time though, because the next step is interviewing. Now, does everyone recognize this guy who was internet famous, gosh, maybe 2 years ago? I can't even remember what the situation was, but he was working from home. He was being interviewed on the BBC about Iranian nuclear weapons. I think it was some sort of foreign policy thing. He's interviewing, and then in the back, the door opens and his toddler daughter walks in and she's dancing, and then the baby in the saucer comes by. And then later you see a woman, I don't know if it's his wife or I'm not quite sure who it was, but like grabs them and drags them out. And what's amazing is that he keeps his cool the entire time. Like he keeps talking, he keeps interviewing, he kind of like uses an arm to push the daughter away. Like he very much keeps his cool all the way through. His face doesn't turn red. But I think the key thing here is that interviewing online is different than interviewing in person, because most people are going to be interviewing in their home or in a third location, right? It's not at the office. So the vibe is a little bit different. There's a couple key things that I want to communicate here about how to make your virtual interview work. The first one is it's got to be on video. 90% of communication is nonverbal, which means you need to be seeing the candidate in the living flesh as you're doing the interview, or you are going to be missing critical elements of the experience. You can use Skype, you can use Google Hangout, you can use Zoom. Find a tool that works for you and that is relatively easy for candidates to also use. You will want to choose a tool that is appropriate for the position that you're hiring for. So for example, if you are hiring for a front-end hourly cashier, somebody who is not going to be behind a computer every day, they just need to ring people up. You want to do something that's easy. Maybe a Google Hangout is just like a one-click. It doesn't require downloading software. It doesn't require that you have a Google account. All it is you provide them with the URL, they click on it, and it's within the web browser. Easy peasy. If you are hiring for an attorney position, someone that does need to be more tech savvy, something that we are expecting them to really understand computers. Maybe you go with Skype. To use a Skype call, you have to have a Skype account. It's easy to set up a Skype account, but that is additional steps that you are expecting that candidate to do in order to successfully have that Skype call with you. So think about choosing your tool that is appropriate for the level of information. If you would anticipate a candidate needing to be really thoughtful about data security or things like that, you might choose a tool that has security parameters in it and be, thinking about, is this candidate good at using security relevant tools in the situation? You also want to make sure you're setting people up for success. So of course, don't choose a tool that's going to be really, really hard for people to use, especially if that's not part of the job description. You also want to make sure that as you are inviting people to the interview process, you are providing really clear directions and technical support. So in your pre-written screen that you sort of copy and paste into every email that you send out to people inviting them for an interview, tell them, what's the tool? Do they need an account? Are there any sort of tips and tricks? Can you link to a tutorial for troubleshooting? Most of these things you don't need to create yourself, right? You don't need to create your own Google Hangout troubleshooting guide. They're out there on the internet with a little Google search, but do take that extra step in making it easy for your candidates to participate remotely. Also think about flexible times for interviews, especially in a situation like this is, maybe some early morning interview times, maybe a couple late evening interview times. This is such a weird time in our society where people have kids that are home, they don't have childcare, kids aren't in school. Just things are chaotic, and expecting people right now to be able to clear their schedules for interviews during lunchtime when they may have 2 or 3 hungry kids to feed is not doing yourself or your candidates any favors. So look for flexible interview times. Once you're on the interview, you may be hiring for a position that is primarily going to be an in-person job. So it could be a professor that's going to teach classes in the classroom. It could be an attorney who's going to be sitting in his office. It could be an intern or a volunteer who is going to be, at the museum giving tours. If the job is going to be primarily in person, you are still going to get important context clues from being able to see them in a virtual interview. So the first one is just, how does the candidate deal with technology? right? Is this somebody who was able to figure it out, was able to troubleshoot on their own without coming back and asking for, for help? Is this somebody who, if they encountered help and could not figure it out on their own, did they reach out ahead of time? Or is this something that 10 minutes after the interview was supposed to start, they're sending you an email that says, oh, I couldn't, for some reason, I can't connect? That is going to tell you a lot about who they are as a person and how they handle not just technology, but also just like overall preparedness. You could also look for things like, what does their workspace look like? Do they, did they have a third place that they went? Or are they doing this from home? Very likely more and more of our jobs are going to go to at least part-time work from home or part-time telecommuting. And you can be looking for things like, does it look like they're prepared to do some work from home? Does this look like they are approaching this professionally? Were they able to organize their time and their space in a way that is respectful of the job, that signals to you that they are taking this seriously? And the third element is, how do they address any technical glitches or oops moments, like your kids walking in behind you or the dog in the background who starts barking maniacally at the mailman who just walked by. I think with virtual interviewing, we give a little bit of grace. We understand that life happens, that funny things. And so I don't necessarily think that technical glitches or oops moments should reflect negatively on the candidate, but they are going to give you real insight into how your candidate addresses and deals with situations when things don't go perfectly. So do they get flustered? Are they a joke? Do they address the issue? If the dog is barking in the background, maybe you ignore it for 15 seconds and hope it goes away. But if it's been going on for 5 or 6 minutes and your candidate doesn't seem to be taking the lead in doing anything, that's a real sign to you that that's how they might deal with situations that might come up at work. So look for that. I also say with the interviewing process, recreate as much of the in-house process as possible. If you do an initial screening call and then an interview and then you narrow it down to your favorite 3 people and you take them all to dinner, try to, think about what your typical hiring process looks like, and then figure out, how do you still keep that process, keep that learning curve, and keep those milestones the same as much as possible. So as you think about interviewing and as you're judging people and deciding, in this funnel, you have all the applicants, people that you decide to, in the screening process that you decide to interview. Once you start the interview process, now we're selecting them. I really recommend multiple video interviews. Is that it's really hard and sometimes unfair to judge people just on one video interaction. So think about different ways to engage them. It doesn't have to be very long, but I like to do a mix of one-on-one interviews, small group interviews, and a large group interview. And we'll talk on the next slide a little bit about what my process looks like. Go for formal and informal. In that first interview, you may be looking for things like, did they put on a suit, right? Our guy in the previous slide that we all laugh at now for being a work-at-home dad, you're right, he's wearing a business suit, even though he's very clearly in his home office at home. Did the candidate show up looking professional? But also going forward, as additional interviews go on, is there an opportunity to have a less formal video process? And the third element is, if you have a social component to your hiring, make sure you keep that in the process. We'll talk about this more on the next slide. In your selection process, shared documentation is key. So think about at an in-person, at a normal office or a normal factory or a normal setting for a workplace, you are going to be talking to other people about the candidates as you go through the interview process. There's water cooler talk, even if there's not something formal. Like, wow, we interviewed a great guy. Yeah, we're going to bring him back next week. I really loved his background in XYZ. Or, man, we interviewed somebody and Jane really loved him. And, he just rubbed me the wrong way. Like having that sort of informal conversation really helps identify not just qualifications, but also cultural fit in an organization, and you lose that in a purely virtual hiring environment. So making sure that as you are, that all of the people involved in the interview process are actively putting their reflections, first impressions, feedback into a common repository of notes that can then be drawn on by other people in the hiring process. If you know that like you and Bob never see eye to eye on candidates, you want to make sure that Bob's not the only one putting his perspective in, that you're getting your perspective in too. And then make sure again that all of your the information that you will be drawing on to assess qualifications like the resume, the CV, writing samples, project portfolios, anything that you want to look at to see evidence of past performance also needs to be available to everybody in the hiring process. And then, so once you sort of have done a couple interviews with people, you've reviewed your information, everybody's put in their notes, now you want to have a group meeting, assuming you're not the only one making the hiring decision. Make sure that, again, you are doing this on video because you do not want to be missing that nonverbal communication. Have a note taker. So if it's me and two other people that are making a decision about like, okay, which guy are we going to hire? Which lady are we going to hire? You know, we have all of our documents in front of us. We've all reviewed it. We've done the interviews. What we want to be doing now is talking amongst ourselves about who we liked, who we didn't like, what concerns us, what we think next steps are. Making sure you have a note taker is really important so that everyone is walking away on the same page and that it's very clear about what the decision was for each candidate. But definitely make sure that you're putting that on video because you want the full scope of communication available. And I think especially when we're talking about evaluating people, there is a lot of unspoken things, right? It's the look on the face. It's the hesitancy in the body language that you want to really be getting all of that from other people in the room or in the virtual room. Okay, so here's an example of my selection process. So this is when we do internships. So when we do internships, we get I would say between 100 and 200 applications for 5 internship slots. So I, as a small team, cannot manage 100 people emailing me with their cover letter, attachments, resume, you know, the whole thing. So here's how it works. We say, here's the job description of an intern. Here's a little bit what it's like. It's sort of similar to what you saw earlier. And then we say, if you're interested, you can come to one of the 2 webinars. And we give 2 different times on 2 different days, one sort of early in the day, one late in the day. So we're giving flexibility. So if you're interested, come to the webinar. And it's a 45-minute webinar, and we talk about just like, here's what it means to be an intern at SSC. Here's some of the things that you would be working on. Here's the stipend that we offer. Here's sort of the process for how we make a decision, where it's basically me talking to them. If you know, this is where you are communicating to candidates about the job, right? This is a one-way, you know, from me to many. So I also talk about the organization, like what's the history of the company? What's really important? What do we look for in a great candidate? What are the types of products and services that we deliver? Again, this is, you know, one-way communication from us to them. What I'm looking for are first impressions. Can people use technology? We do a lot of computer-based stuff. Did people show up on time, ready to go? And what I say at the end is, if based on this information that I've shared, you are still interested in becoming an intern, here are the next steps. And that is where I link to the intake form. You know, here's, you know, you could send us an email or here's the link to the Google form. Here's the documentation that we want you to provide. So I am giving people a chance to really see me, give me a chance of what it's like to work with me, hear about our organization, and then they are choosing whether or not to opt in. I would say that 20 to 30% of people who do attend those things say, this is not for me, and they move on. That's good for them because they're not wasting any more time in a job search process that's not good for them. But it's also good for me because now I'm not dealing with like 40 other applications from people who really wouldn't be a good fit. So once I sort of do that process, the next step for us is a one-on-one interview. People submit their information. we do a very, very quick screen. We go through very quickly and say, no, 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 no. And then everybody else, we say, okay, is this like a maybe, or on a scale of 1 to 10? It sort of depends on the year, how many applications we have. But once we figure out that group that we say, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and interview this group, we do a one-on-one interview. And that is a video screen. We do it for 20 minutes. So again, for internships, I'm churning through them. For consultant roles or full-time positions, permanent positions, obviously I would go a little bit longer. But what I find is that hour-long interviews are often much too long, because what I'm looking for is just a quick way to screen people out at this point. I'm looking for qualification assessment. Do they have the skills I'm looking for? Do they have good communication skills? Do they have a decent presence? I'm also getting a chance now on a one-on-one to learn more about the candidate. So this is more about me hearing from them. So in that large group screening, it's them hearing from me. And in the one-on-one interview, it's flipping. This is where I also start to ask scenario questions, like one of the big trends in sustainability consulting right now is XYZ. One of the challenges that companies are having when they come to us is blah, blah, blah. If you were me, what would be the first step that you would do, or something like that. This idea of asking some of those probing questions, asking how they would handle things. This is where you get your traditional interview questions. Let's say that they are like, they pass that first screening, and I would say probably 50% of people, I just think right off the bat, that's probably not a good fit. That smaller group maybe comes in, and here's where we might do some additional one-on-one interviews that might be a little bit longer, might be with different people. So for example, if we have interns that are going to primarily work on specific projects, I might have the project leader do a screening of 5 or 6 people that I think might be, a good fit. And again, 20 or 30 minutes usually is enough to get a sense of should they be screened out? So I'm not yet looking for the right person. I'm looking for who is not the right person. And then sort of we whittle it down over a series of one-on-one interviews. And then at the end, for us, we like to do a social event. So sometimes we'll actually, if we're recruiting with a specific college for internships, we might go do like a little event there. But when we're doing it virtually, we do a small group social event. So we'll do like a meet and greet lunch, where it's like a brown bag lunch. Please bring your lunch to this Zoom call, where maybe we're having the last, 5 or 6 people that we want to hire. It's your short list. It's your people that you know have the right qualifications. They've passed sort of the initial sniff test, and now we're just seeing, are they good fit? And you can do that very much like you might take a shortlist candidate to lunch or to dinner. You can do this virtually. Say, please bring your lunch. We're going to have an informal lunch together. This is where you start to say, are they good fit for the organization? What's their overall energy level? Are they introverted? Are they extroverted? How do they interact with company leaders? If you're inviting a VP or the company owner, if you're not the owner yourself, how do they interact? And how do they interact with both you and the boss in the room? Can be really telling. And this is where you can also talk more informally about things like, what are your longer term goals? Or what do you like to do on the weekends? Or what do you think about the potential for moving here? If this is, you're hiring remotely because they live somewhere else and they're expected to relocate. That social event, you can get a lot more context for the fit of this person for your organization. Okay, so let's say that you found the best person that you think. You're ready to make them an offer. Obviously, you need a formal offer letter. If you have informally hired before, now is a good time to formalize it. There are lots and lots of offer letters templates that you can download from the internet. Use that. Create a formal offer letter, especially when you're doing virtual hiring. It's really important to have practical, tangible, in writing offers. In that offer letter, you want to be extra sure to note any caveats. Again, this is virtual, but it's expected to be in person, or this is completely virtual, but we expect you to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week once this pandemic is over. Or this is a grant-funded project and it's only guaranteed for 1 year. or this offer is good for the next 2 days, and after 2 days, we reserve the right to go ask someone else to take this job. Any caveats, really think through in this unique situation where there's so much uncertainty in our businesses. Are there any caveats that you should put there? One, to protect yourself, but again, also to be a good employer. And here's the trick. Here's the difference that makes this virtual, is that make sure you schedule with that offer letter a 15-minute go-over video call. This is 10 or 15 minutes to just walk through on a video call with the person all the elements of the offer. You want to be able to explain. You want to be able to clarify anything. You want to give the other person a chance to react to your offer, both consciously and subconsciously, right? Both verbally and non-verbally, react to that letter and sort of walk through it. Doing that on a video call is going to give you a lot of feedback about where the sticking points of your offer may be, in a way that if you just email it or just do it in a phone call, you will miss. So to be in a strong position for negotiation, you want to be able to grab all of the information that you can see in a video call. Okay, so let's talk about onboarding. So now your candidate has accepted your offer and everyone's really happy. The job may be starting right now, or it may be starting later in the future. But that doesn't mean you can't start taking action now to get ready for virtual onboarding. And the first step is just to look at what do you already have for onboarding. What processes, what documents do we already have? Have we actually identified what our onboarding process looks like? You'd be shocked at the number of organizations that haven't. Really thinking about what does someone need in order to be successful at the job? How can we set them up for success? So what do we have? What do we need? And who needs to work on this? What you will likely find is that people outside of the direct hiring process will still need to be involved in the onboarding process. And so the next question is, what can be done remotely? What onboarding needs to be done in person, and what can we do remotely? Things that can easily be done remotely are policies and online training. So if you have a code of conduct, if you have an employee handbook, if you have confidentiality policies, non-disclosure agreements, any of that stuff can be provided in written format with those 15-minute go-over video calls, whether it is a formalized training that you are issuing to multiple new hires at once, sort of like we work with a company that the first Tuesday of every month, they do a lunch meeting for all new hires for that month, where they go over the employee handbook and code of conduct and sort of all of the basic policies that they have. And they do that. Sometimes they do it in person, sometimes they do it remotely, but those are things that, like, just the basic information can be conveyed to new hires. Healthcare and benefits, that's something that, I think traditionally, usually you sit down with the HR person across the table and you sort of go through documents. Can that stuff be put online into some sort of package? Can there be remote training associated with that? Environment, health and safety and security, that is both physical health and safety and security, so rules about I'm trying to think, guns on the property, or occupational illnesses, ergonomics. It might be data confidentiality, or treating customer information confidentially. That information is a little bit trickier, but a lot of the basic information can be conveyed remotely and provided through virtual training. Onboarding, a huge part of onboarding that I think we neglect, especially when we're doing virtual onboarding, is socialization, right? It's really important in like the first month of your job, or maybe even a few weeks before you take the job, is starting to get to know the people you're going to work with. And especially if you're trying to maintain that organizational culture, you want to make sure that you are providing lots and lots of time and opportunities for new hires to get socialized with their coworkers. This, of course, will happen somewhat naturally through the daily work, if you have like a daily check-in video call, or people's emails and things like that. But setting up regular virtual lunches, virtual happy hours as a group that you invite your new hire to, but also one-on-one, reaching out and saying, over the next 2 weeks, every day at 10 o'clock, we want you to take a virtual coffee break with a different person on the accounting team. Or the facilities team, or whoever it is that you're going to be working with, and making sure that you are helping to facilitate that and setting that up as an expectation can go a tremendous way to helping people start to have personal connections with their coworkers. The last component is technology, and depending on your industry and your organization, you may or may not decide it's worth exploring these things, but increasingly we're now seeing virtual and augmented reality tours of the facility, walkthroughs of machinery. If you are hiring for things, especially vocational things where people are going to be doing things, welding things, building things, designing things, it may be important, especially if you're in this weird, like, we're at home, but really we need you in the office, or we need you on the factory floor. Looking at a virtual or augmented reality, where they're actually putting on like the VR goggles, is something that we're seeing more and more of. At a minimum, you might consider just a recorded tour. Give somebody a phone, have them, hit record and do a walkthrough of the facility to give them a sense of, the layout of the space. Here's where your desk will be. You're right down the hall from the accounting team, and down here is the marketing and communications team, and Judy, say hi. Giving that, again, that personalized feel to give people a sense of place can be very powerful to connect them to your organization, rather than them just seeing your organization as an email or a computer screen. Really giving people a feel for where they'll be working, who they'll be working with, can be really powerful. Okay, so that is the end. We have saved a few questions, a few minutes at the end for Q&A. I hope that was helpful. I'm pretty excited to hear any questions that have come in. We have a few extra minutes, so if you haven't entered a question but you want to, there is still time. Start typing. Tracy, did we have anything come in?
Just thanks for a great presentation. What are your thoughts about engaging, recruiting, or staffing agencies to support hiring virtually?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what you're hiring for. Different recruiting agencies are going to be good at different types of recruiting. So my preference is always to look for somebody who specializes in what you're doing. So if you are a law firm, I would not just go to any recruiting agency. I would go to one that specializes in recruiting for law firms. I think service providers like recruiters or agencies can be really, really helpful, but I think it's also really important that it doesn't mean it's less work for you. It is, in many cases, actually more work for you to work with a recruiter or an agency, because now there's a middleman who's in between you and the candidate. If a recruiting agent, you need to make sure that the agency really understands the culture, the fit, the unspoken rules, and that they're able to convey that. Because I think what often happens with recruiters or agencies is the cultural fit and the unspoken rules components don't get communicated up early enough. Agencies are very good at, like, you need a college degree, you need 5 years of PowerPoint, you need 7 years in direct management experience, like the basics, like the boring stuff that we see on every single job description. But they're not good at conveying what makes your organization special, or what's going to make a really good candidate fit with you, what is really going to make them thrive. And I think that sometimes that can really hurt us, especially if you're a smaller organization, where fit is even more important. Personality fit is even more important.
Jennifer, we don't actually have any other questions. So, and I'm not seeing anybody else typing them in. Stephanie, do you want to go ahead and close out?
Yeah, I actually just put the link in for where we normally post the slides and the video of the previous training, and I'll also have the link to being able to register for next week's, or I'm sorry, not next week, but Thursday's Managing Your Supply Chain Remotely webinar. That will be at same time, same bat time, same bat channel, you guys. You can register for that at sbdclynchburgregion.org. Search for us on Facebook or see all the recorded training we have to offer by searching Virginia SBDC on YouTube. Stay well, everybody, and in your house. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.